And welcome back. We are now going to look at how to implement parallax effects, which is something that we have done before, but we did that in Photoshop. And we did it for little cool things in backgrounds such as like waterfalls and stuff like that. But how can we do that here in Animate? Well, parallax effects are actually really easy to implement here in Adobe Animate. So to get started, I'm actually going to go ahead and import into my stage here some images. So I got this background image that I found here. And you'll notice that it is larger than my canvas, and that's perfectly okay. I'm just going to grab my free transform tool, and I want to shrink that down so that way it's going to fit closer to that canvas size. If it's a little bit larger, that's okay. But you will notice that it is wider, and that's perfectly okay because we want this to be where we can loop this effect. Now, it's not going to be a perfect loop, but it's going to be pretty close, I think. We'll be able to get something that's pretty satisfactory. All right. So now that this is here, let's go ahead and rename this layer as our background. And I want to add a new layer, and I'm going to go ahead and import a character here. So let's import a stage, this adventurer character. And we're going to shrink them on down to size here. Let's hold down the shift key here to help keep them in proportion. And I'll zoom back in. All right. And of course, now we have this character here. So let's shrink them down just a little bit more, so a little more in scale. And what I want to do is I want the adventurer to walk across my screen this way to the right, but then I want my background moving to the left. So it helps add that, illusion of motion here when we don't necessarily have that. So let's just set up a real quick and easy set of motion tweens here. So let's just set this up for 1 second. So I'm just going to go ahead and insert some frames here. And let's go ahead and rename this to Adventurer. All right, and now that that's renamed, let's focus first on our adventurer here. I think that's a good one to start with. So let's go ahead and right click and add ourselves a motion tween. And of course we have our starting position and we want to set their ending position. We want them to maybe end up over here, and we want to maybe have also that when they're starting, they're a little further away, so we might hold down that shift key and just shrink their size down a little bit. And we might say, we also want to manipulate this motion path, so we can do all those different things as we've done before. But of course right now, if we were to play it, they move across. But again, our background, you notice, is very static. We want that background instead to move itself. So we're going to do the same thing as we did before. We're going to create a motion tween. And of course, we'll get the same warning. We click OK. And one thing we want to check here with our background now is that it's set as a movie clip, and that is fine. So we're going to go and set our end position. And I'm actually going to zoom back out here so I can see this full image. And I want to make it so this is going to end up moved across the screen here. So I get to this other edge. And that looks pretty good there. Now, of course, you'll see if we look at this, we might end up inadvertently bending this line a little bit. So I'm going to Control Z, and what I'm going to do is when I go to move that across, I'm going to hold down my Shift key so that I can maintain a straight line here. So as this image moves, we get a nice straight line. Rather than it might look like it's straight, we know that it's straight because again, we use that Shift key to help hold that down. And so now as we have that adventure move across the screen, we're also having the screen itself move as well. So if I zoom this back in just a little bit here and press play, you can see it moves quite rapidly. Now that might be a little bit too fast for what we want that to do. So we of course can adjust, for example, that line here. So we may say, we want this to move a lot slower. We can of course adjust that. So maybe we want to come back to this motion piece here, and maybe I don't want it quite that far. Maybe I want it to maybe be a little less of a roll here between those pieces. And you notice that this is smaller. When I make that smaller and I press play, you notice that the motion is not as fast. So if we want a really quick background, we want to have this line be nice and long. Whereas we're looking for something a little bit slower, we can of course take this same animation and make a very short movement here to make that loop not as large. All right, but that is a real quick way of how we can introduce a parallax effect. I'm just going to go ahead and bend though my character here to kind of give more of a natural approach in rather than just a straight line run. And so when we play the animation, of course, you will see that this is now looping in such a way that it is going to actually benefit us to have a much more rich and dynamic background, just because we included this parallax effect. We could, of course, add other things in here. So if I added another element that would go in a different direction, that would also work. Because remember, the parallax effects effectively are making it so our background is animated here, in addition to whatever we have going on. And the parallax effects are typically going to run left to right across our screen. Now there are a couple more kind of fine things that we can look at to really kind of help enrich these parallax effects rather than just a simple motion piece. But we'll look at that in the next lecture to see how we can do things like slow effects to really help add that next layer of dynamic to our image.